You are now tuned into Flipping the Birds, a Philly Sports Network podcast.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome one, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds.
He's into the end zone. Touchdown, Eagles.
What's going on, Eagles fans? Welcome on, welcome all to another episode of Flipping the Birds. I'm Brian Cameron alongside Zach Chavalella. Good morning to everybody. How you feeling, Zach?
I'm tired, man. I'm in vacation mode, full on. Heading to Ocean City right after this, or I guess I should say after the game. And I'm also excited for the game. You know, last week of the preseason, this is a week that for a lot of people kind of drags on. But, you know, for me, it's always been my favorite week of the preseason because you're watching people who, you know, are out there playing for their careers, playing for spots, playing for roles, and playing for their football lives. So it's always been exciting for me. But how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Can't complain. I think you hit the nail on the head. This is the day that we see people go throw their bodies across the end zone, hurdling over crowds of offensive linemen, defensive linemen. But yeah, it's tough because after this is when the cuts begin. When you start seeing players that you thought would make it, buying for a job elsewhere or being traded elsewhere. But the Eagles still have a lot of questions on their roster heading into this game. So I don't believe we're seeing the starters at all this preseason, if I'm not mistaken, unless it gets announced today. I haven't seen anything come down the pipeline in that regard. But a player that I'm very curious about is James Bradberry is still here. And we've seen him in safety so far, and it hasn't looked promising, to say the least.
Yeah, I would say, a couple things on that. If we see James Bradberry in this game, that's a bad sign. And I mean that for Bradberry's stock, effectively, right? Because if Bradberry's playing in this game, and the excuse could come, well, they're trying to get him as Brian, I'm sorry, but you were just murdered, and I had to.
Yeah, I don't know. Who
you have to give credit
is,
where credit's due, man. You have to.
I would if it wasn't such a common joke.
But the thing of it though is Bradberry is also bald, so you're kind of just Bradberry at that.
That's fair.
PSN's own James Bradberry. How's that make you feel?
That's not a compliment, first and foremost. After last year, that's not a compliment. But let's be honest for a second. Not every bald person looks like every other bald person.
I don't know. I know a lot of bald white guys that look exactly the same. But anyway, back to Baldberry. You know, if he's still playing in this week in preseason, you know, that the excuse could come down the pipeline that, you know, we're just trying to get him as many snaps at safety as possible to make sure he's as comfortable as possible. And, you know, there's some truth to that. You know, if you have a player who you truly envision playing that, you know, kind of position, like if you're really making a positional switch, James Bradberry is not expected to be the starting safety of this team. James Bradberry is not being looked at to play a major role at safety. I think they're trying to recoup any potential value, whether it's on the field for this team or for another team, out of James Bradberry. And that's really what this points to, is that they haven't had the conversations that they like in terms of potentially moving him. They haven't seen what they would want to see in terms of him actually pulling off the conversion to safety. So either way, if James Bradberry plays today, I take that as a negative, but that's just one thing to watch for me.
I completely agree. I mean, it seems like his stock is very low, and it could also not be his stock. It could also be the fact that a lot of teams don't want to inherit that guaranteed money. I know Bradberry has significant amount of guaranteed money going into this season, and the Eagles don't want to pay the entirety of that. I get it. I completely understand that. But you got to cut ties at some point, whether, you know, it was best for the player as also what's best for the team. They do have Caden Stearns, but that's his first name, right, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
Okay, Stearns, who they just signed, right? I know he has a knee issue at the moment. Sidney Brown is coming along well in his recovery, so I don't know if we'll see him as a starter. or if we'll see him so heavily involved within the first couple of weeks. And then you have Gardner Johnson and Reed Blankenship, who are are the starters going forward. They're going to be the guys until Brown comes along and takes the job from Blankenship. But again, like even the cornerback situation, like Bradbury has no, like you mentioned, he has no spot on his roster. Honestly, I mean, you're gonna start him over, play him over Keely Ringo, play him over Cooper, you're gonna play him over Eli Ricks, who also could also be a little bit of a trade base in his own situation as well. Eli Ricks, I mean, a standout last year, could be on the outs just because of the amount of talent that they have at cornerback. Would you be surprised if they move a player like Eli Ricks?
I wouldn't be, only because I have I, the depth of this corner spot, right, it's surprisingly deep. I know it's not as top heavy as some people would like to see, but considering everyone from, I mean, obviously you have Ringo and Slay, and then they drafted DeJean, who they do truly see as a corner from all accounts, and then I'm obviously not forgetting Kenyon Mitchell, but when you start going down this depth chart, like when do you get to the point where you feel like okay, well, here's the spot for Eli Ricks? Like there's just not a true opportunity, it feels like. So I think he's talented. I think he's young, which is a pro as well. I do have concerns about playing time for him. If Eli Ricks at this point, like this current Eli Ricks, was on the roster like 2 years from now, when Darius Slay probably won't be, I think things change a little bit for me. But just between Slay and Isaiah Rogers and then all the young guys, I don't see the opportunity being there. So if somebody is interested in Eli Ricks, I definitely see him potentially being moved in that case.
And he's a player that you can't sneak on the practice squad either. And I'm pretty sure Howie knows that he can't risk that.
Yeah.
But so we mentioned Bradbury as a player to watch today. On both sides of the ball, who are you looking most forward to seeing today in today's game? I know Cooper's actually making his debut as an Eagle, right? Is there any players as well as Cooper that you are excited to see and you feel like everybody should look out for?
Yeah, for me, let's start defensively, right? So Cooper, I think, is the player to watch for everybody. With that being said, I still want to see more out of Nolan Smith. That's kind of been the big thing for me. Nakobe Dean, I think, has kind of won over a lot of people with his preseason performance. And, good for him for doing so. Like, that's exactly what he was supposed to do. He did it, and he's seeing some real success. And we may even see him, starting some games for the Eagles, which is, I think, fantastic considering what we expected to begin the season. But Nolan Smith, granted, he's had a sack here and there. It just hasn't really looked like everything's clicking for him. So I would just like to go and see him kind of dominate against scrubs on a bad team. That's what I want to see. Like this isn't going to be like, oh, he's going up against, the 49ers and did this. Like you're not going to get that kind of opportunity in the preseason. So what do you have to do? You have to go out and take care of business when you do play against the opponent that you are facing. So I do want to see, and it's not a matter of like, oh, I need 1, 2, 3 sacks. No, I need to see consistent motor. I need to see a move or two. I mean, like, damn, like you got to get by a guy by something more than just speed. Like that's my big thing with Nolan Smith. So he's my guy to watch defensively, and then offensively. Well, let's talk about Smith, and then I'll come back to my offensive guy to watch.
Yeah, so I was a big advocate of Smith going into this offseason, but everything you're saying is everything I'm seeing as well. Like it just seems like he hasn't developed the fine tunes to a swim move or anything of that sort to get by the defender. I mean the offensive tackles. I'm honestly concerned for their edge for the edge of the defensive line. Without Hassan Reddick, you were thinking Bryce Huff is going to be the guy, right? But not everybody's 100% guaranteed to feeling like Bryce Huff is that guy. Nolan Smith right now is the guy that you expect to make that leap. Can he make a leap? Absolutely, but like you said, we got to see the consistency out of it. You're not stronger than every single tackle in the league. You got to develop some type of move to get by. Defensively, I think Nolan Smith is a guy you got to keep your eyes on today. But I am extremely excited to see Cooper DeJean play, make his debut, right? See how he looks, see where he is in his development in the pro league, and then also like Matt had mentioned, like Jalen Hunt is apparently catching everybody's eye. Like he's apparently the guy that's going to end up developing into this monster athlete off the edge, and I would love to see a heavy amount of snaps for him today because going into the season, when it comes to depth, you have you know Bryce Huff, Josh Sweat, then you have Brandon Graham, Nolan Smith. I would love to see them throw Hunt into the mix once in a blue, just to see what his raw talent could develop into. But as far as the defensive side, completely agree with you on that regard. Offensively, how you feeling?
Yeah, so I have a boring pick and an exciting pick. All right. So the boring pick, Trevor Keegan has been fantastic during camp and preseason. And I really look forward to not hearing his name or noticing him on the field. That's what I really want to see out of him. Because, when you have an offensive lineman who's, truly locked down, like the best thing that you can see out of an offensive lineman, or I guess what I'll say is, out of a guard is not noticing the guy. Like, no real concern about like hold penalties, anything like that. You don't want to see him getting blown up, obviously. So if you're not hearing his name, if you're not seeing him, that's usually, a good indication. But, the additional thing I want to see any opportunities to get him out into space and see, what he can look like a blocker a little bit up the field. That's something that we know that they do tend to pull linemen. I haven't closely watched it during the first two games, just because I've been focused on the skill position guys, but it's something that I'd be interested in taking a look at here in game 3. But the more exciting player that I want to watch is EJ Jenkins. I think there's a real opportunity here for him to take, if they, carry 3 tight ends, which is a question still.
Mm-hmm.
But if they carry 3 tight ends, I think EJ Jenkins has a legitimate chance to make this team. I mean, he's shown himself as a playmaking tight end. He's probably the second best playmaking tight end on this team. It's just in terms of blocking where he's not really, a star, but he's still developing, I should say.
Okay.
But as a receiver, he's looking really solid. So I want to see, him have a chance to thrive in this game and possibly secure a roster spot for himself.
That's an interesting pick. Calcaterra is also. I feel like he's also in the style of Jenkins, where he's not a great blocker, but he's actually a pretty good playmaker. They lost that with Stoll, and I was actually surprised that they cut your boy Uzoma.
My boy.
Yeah, it was either you or Eric that said he was definitely making the roster.
I mean, what I remember is saying that I didn't want Logan Thomas, and I might have mentioned him in that sentence. But I'm still comfortable without him on the team because it was one of those free agency signings that just you sign it over, kind of like if they signed Logan Thomas, kind of an over the hill guy, just wouldn't really pan out, and then he's gone before the start of the season. So I'm excited for the infusion of youth into this tight end room, and Calcaterra I think is doing solid as a tight end too. But EJ Jenkins is a guy who can potentially push Calcaterra a little bit, or at least kind of fill out that tight end 3 role.
Okay, that's fair. I'm actually looking at the wide receiver position. I'm actually looking at Anaya Smith and Johnny Wilson, just because we heard the rave all over training camp about Johnny Wilson, but we have yet to see it against another team on the field. Anaya Smith, the mention of this week has been that he's actually progressing in the right direction, and they did trade for John Dotson, so there's a likelihood that one of these 2 players will hit the practice squad while the other one stays on the roster. So I'm curious to see them battle it out and see which one is actually going to be locked in this season. It seems like it's going to be Johnny Wilson, but I don't know. Coming out of the draft, it seemed like Smith was going to be that player that we want Dotson to be. With the speed in the middle of the field, playing in the slot, reliable wide receiver 3. I get it, he's a rookie, but it was odd to not see him show out. Even as a kick returner, he didn't really do much back there that Covey doesn't already do, or that Covey does better. So I'm curious to see them ball out today and see what we actually have in them.
Yeah, Smith is probably a guy that you have a better likelihood of keeping on the practice squad over Johnny Wilson. Like Johnny Wilson's a guy who'll get snatched. People were talking about moving him to tight end after his performance, just because they were looking for a way to keep him on the roster. So Johnny Wilson, I see staying. Guys like John Ross, I don't see staying. So, when you talk about the battle, I think he kind of narrowed it down right. You're looking at Ian Smith, you're looking at Johnny Wilson. And if there's a way to keep both, I think they will. We'll kind of touch on that in a little bit when we talk about surprise cuts. But I think that is a kind of a position battle to watch today, and I think the pressure is much more so on Ian Smith than it is on Johnny Wilson.
I completely agree with that. And to in reference to this comment from by King B Hart, Paris Campbell is out of the race. I don't think Campbell's out of the race, to be honest. I mean, he's a Sirianni guy that they spent money on, and that they expect him to probably be that rotational piece with Jahan Dotson. Because if you're trading for Dotson and Dotson doesn't hit, and you got rid of Campbell, you're in a shitstorm, for lack of better terms. But I think Campbell's gonna be the rotational piece with Dotson. I think Dotson's going to be the starter once he comes along with this offense. I'm actually pretty damn excited about that trade. I know we kind of touched on it a little bit on Thursday night, but we were more focused on our on fantasy draft. But before we get to surprise cuts, Jahan Dotson, the perfect piece to this puzzle that we've been questioning all season of wide receiver 3, or is it just another big name added to the mix?
I'm pretty hopeful for him, actually. I don't think that you can expect to see this guy go out. You're like, oh, he's going to get 750 yards and 6 touchdowns. Like, I don't think that's the expectation for Dotson. But I think if he can kind of replicate what he did, he doesn't even have to hit the 500-yard mark. But as long as he gets kind of close to that and opens the field, more importantly for all the other receivers, and I think that's a success. And one big thing here with Dotson is that in college, obviously, he was a bit more of a gadget receiver, played a lot, in the slot. At the pro level, he's played a lot more outside, right? So that brings up 2 good points. One, he can play outside if the Eagles need him to, right? So we can have snaps where we have A.J. Brown in the slot. We can have snaps where we have Devonta Smith in the slot. If one of these 2 guys goes down, heaven forbid, you can put him on the outside, and he's a half-decent placeholder there. But the other thing that it brings up is, what are the odds he's been poorly utilized since he's been drafted and has played for Washington this entire time? We've heard people who are connected to the Washington media come out since the trade and say, oh, well, he might have been cut even because, he either had like a poor work ethic or had a poor relationship with the team. Like, no shit, he had a poor relationship with the team. It's the Commanders. They suck. They're terrible. Like this, it's a horrendous organization.
And they've had a rotating
You had
door
no
at
quarterback,
QB.
no offensive line. You had
Exactly.
no owner until last year, and now your owner. Well, at least he focuses on football because he doesn't focus on the other teams that he owns. So you have this situation that is explosive. Frankly, I don't think you can put a lot on Dotson for whatever perceived lack of service that you're getting from him in Washington. Now in Philadelphia, I think there's a real opportunity for him under an organization that has true leadership, with a quarterback who's actually capable, other playmakers out there with him, not just Scary Terry, who, has been a lot more Terry than Scary lately. And so, have a chance for him possibly to operate inside the slot, get back to, his roots effectively at Penn State, and be able to do that. And maybe that works out better for him. Maybe he is able to perform on the outside, whatever the case may be. But I'm hopeful for this trade. I don't think it's going to be, the next star wide receiver in Philadelphia. I'm not putting that kind of level of expectations on him, but I see no reason why this won't be a positive addition for the Philadelphia Eagles.
I think you hit it in the middle of your segment, right? This is not only a slot piece. This is
I did go on. I did kind of make it a segment. I did.
You did, but I like. But listen, it was everything that needed to be said about this trade, right? Dotson is just more than just another receiver, right? This guy, if you think about it, if AJ goes down, were you happy with Johnny Wilson stepping up or Paris Campbell stepping up or Britton Covey? Possibly not. If AJ goes down, you have Devontae and Dotson, and then you have Campbell, as a third. If Devontae goes down, but AJ's healthy, then you have this guy that can do everything that Devontae and AJ can do. Now, he's limited because he doesn't have the big catch radius like AJ Brown does, but he's a damn good route runner, just like Devontae Smith is. And he has the ability to find these empty pockets in the middle of the field between defenders where he has enough space to make the catch and make a play after that. He did have his best game of his career against the Eagles. I think it was like 104 yards on 8 catches, something of that sort. But I'm excited about this move because, like you said, like this is more about depth than it is about just plugging them into the slot. Like you have a team that's very well-rounded in this case, organizationally and like whole roster. We've said it so many times this offseason where it's like so weird to see an organization just do its job correctly. Cornerback, amazing depth. Running back, they didn't get rid of Gainwell, and we know Gainwell could be a good serviceable running back as long as he's not overused. They drafted Will Shipley. Offensive line, like Tyler Steen, Trevor Keegan, Dylan McMahon, like these are solid depth pieces going into the season. Didn't even mention Matt Hennessy as well. Like they're covering their asses just in case. Worst case scenario, if anybody goes down, they're good. And I feel like Jahan Dotson is going to be a really, really good piece for us. Is he the second coming of Devontae Smith? Possibly not. He's not going to – we don't expect him to be a star. But if he can be reliable, like if you think back to the Super Bowl, if Quez Watkins had made that catch or sold the pass interference
or
better.
not fumbled that ball.
Or not fumbled the ball. Like, these are things, if Dotson doesn't do the Quez Watkins stuff, it's a win no matter what. You get me? Like, if he shows up and doesn't do the Watkins stuff, it's a win. And I think that's the key ingredient in this trade.
Yeah, I think for me, you know, what this really looks like is a team that is truly trying to compete. You know, this is the kind of move that winning teams make. You know, this is what the Golden Tate trade should have been. And I know that that's early,
perfect.
you know, because we haven't seen the guy take the field for Philly yet. But what I mean by that, you know, is the spirit of it. You know, you're not getting a guy who's kind of entering the twilight of his career. You know, you're getting somebody who's really should be just entering their prime, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're getting somebody who doesn't have, you know, I'll say the expectations of a Golden Tate. Again, word out of Washington is that Dotson is, you know, looking forward to establishing himself, and you know, I'll leave it to Washington media to cover that more. But you know, with that being said, you know, you're talking about a guy who, you know, is trying to prove himself, is going to be willing to do the right things, and you know, as opposed to somebody who has that sense of entitlement. It seems like coming in. So, you know, you're bringing in a guy who is still rather young in his career. You don't have to worry about the drop off. He's controllable from a contract perspective for a couple more years. You know, he doesn't have the high cap hit that the Golden Tate has either.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, with that kind of current and future flexibility, you're looking at a piece who's going to be able to help Philadelphia compete for the next 2 to 3 years. And I mean, I think that's, you know, where you really start to see this kind of payoff, is because they didn't even trade, you know, a 3rd round pick to get this guy, right? So let's put this into perspective. They traded a 4th round pick during the draft to get that 3rd round pick, which was going to be a low 3rd rounder because it's either the Dolphins or the Eagles. I expect both teams to be around 10 or more wins this season. Mm-hmm. So either way, you're looking at a lower 3rd round pick, right? So they then move that 3rd round pick and 2 7th rounders for Dotson and a 5th round pick from Washington, which is obviously expected to be a higher 5th round pick, right? So in that case, you're effectively moving let's even take Dotson out of the equation. You're moving 2 7th rounders and a low 3rd, which is, let's call that practically a 4th, for a 5th that is also practically a 4th, right? So you're not really losing too much from a value perspective, right? This kind of goes into, you know, we talked about the Kenny Pickett trade, and everyone's like, oh, they gave up a 4th round pick for Kenny Pickett. No, they didn't. They didn't. They traded down. I think it was like, I forget exactly how many, like 27 spots or something like that. Like it. So, you know, there's value that they lost, sure. But at the same time, it's not that they outright traded one of these picks. So for the value of what they gave up, and I think you can look across the league, you know, look at some of the fans across the league, look at some of the media across the league, look at Madden and see how this move is ridiculed in Madden. Like, there's no effective downside on Philadelphia's end because the risk is so minimal and the reward is so potentially high.
I had to get a little creative on Madden to make it happen the other night, but you're absolutely right in that regard. So moving away from Dotson, before we go to surprise cuts, Tyler Steen, Mekhi Becton, King Big Harp wants to know who wins the battle. I personally think it's already
won, dude.
Yeah, it's Becton is the starting right guard. I think the question now is, what is Tyler Steen? If he's not a starting right guard, is he a backup tackle like he was in college? He was a tackle coming into the league. But yeah, I mean, Becton seems to be the guy. I doubt we see him on the field unless we start his play today.
Yeah, I also doubt we see Becton just from a I don't want to say conditioning standpoint because I don't know that it's necessarily dude's been puking a lot. Like uh, I don't know what's going on. I don't know how they plan on solving that, and maybe that's one thing where we end up actually seeing Steen in the regular season because there's something going on with Becton, and you know I don't know what it is. That's the one concern that I have with him. And is it that he's going too hard? Like maybe, but he's got to get his body so it's ready to go too hard, right? So that's the whole thing. So while he's still doing that and upping his conditioning and everything like that, and I think it'll help too. As we, we're leaving the summer months, and we're getting into football season, fall season. I think that may help just getting rid of that heat a bit for Becton, but that's the only concern that I have for him as far as Steen. I do see him as the backup right guard. Now, the question that I do have is with the rise of Keegan, I think you bring up a good point about possibly kicking him out to tackle, just because I also don't have a lot of faith, with these tackles. I know that the Eagles have more faith than I do. They're big fans of Fred Johnson. I can't really explain that one. But you look at Darian Kennard on the other side. It's like it's finds another depth piece. I kind of like Aneem Dankwa long term, but he's not ready to be the backup right guard or backup right tackle for Philadelphia.
Mm.
So I think you might have to look at Steen as being kind of that flexible chess piece. Almost kind of like an offensive line version of Cooper DeJean, where you can kind of plug and play him on that right side where needed effectively. So the only other thing that I wonder is if you feel confident enough in Mekhi Becton that if Lane Johnson goes down, you can kick him out to right tackle and move Steen to right guard. But the double switch is something that you really don't want to do because why would you move two pieces instead of just one? Like it's not like baseball where things are kind of like a lot more simplistic. There's so much from a timing perspective. There's so much from an offensive line chemistry perspective that moving two pieces when you typically really only have to move one is typically not recommended. So that's the only question mark that I have in terms of kicking out Becton. But I would, from a talent perspective, feel a lot more confident about Steen at guard and Becton at tackle as opposed to Steen at tackle.
I wouldn't put it past them to do the double switch because the Eagles, the trust in Jeff Stoutland is, I feel like the most secure thing within the organization at this point. Like they live and die by his word, and if he says the double switch is gonna work, it'll work. If he says it won't, then we'll probably see Steen try a little bit more at right tackle. But you brought an interesting point with Keegan, like if he's gonna be the guard of the future at some point, right? Like do you start training Tyler Steen to be your right tackle, like after Lane Johnson is all said and done? Which Lane said he has about 2 or 3 more years in him. But Becton's gonna, he's gonna demand if he has a good season, he's gonna demand a big contract at the end of the year. Do you invest in money in Becton, or do you invest, the time in Steen and Keegan going into next season, just trusting the program that Stoutland has? So I definitely agree with everything you pretty much said there. Surprise cuts. Who is on your radar? I feel like I have one on my radar. It shouldn't be a surprise, but it's gonna be a glorious in a way that it'll be beneficial for Quinion Mitchell losing the 30 number. Zach McPherson seems like he may have overstayed his time in Philly, and it's nothing against him. The kid's talented, he can ball. The issue at hand is we mentioned before the cornerback depth is pretty significant with talent. And you can the top 4 cornerbacks you can actually start on any team pretty much. McPherson probably see more time on a different team, but it does open the number 27 for Quinion Mitchell. I feel like that to me would be a surprise cut because it'll be out of nowhere. But it should also be kind of expected, I feel like, at this point.
So my whole thing with Zach McPherson, who I like, mind you, how many nickel corners do you need? That's kind of the question, right? You have Avonte Maddox, you have Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who's going to take some snaps at the nickel, at least potentially, he has that history there. Cooper Eugene is another guy who you expect to get some snaps in the slot. Keon Mitchell is looking to be the starting nickel corner, which is odd just considering Avonte Maddox. So it's curious to see what they actually do there. But with that being said, I agree. I don't think Zach McPherson is a guy who makes this team. A Josh Jobe maybe finds a way onto the practice squad, but Zach McPherson, I just don't see him on the team. And again, it's a shame because if he didn't get hurt, maybe we had another year of continued growth in production. But just with the way the roster is constructed, he's one of those guys who you look at this cornerback room, which isn't immense, mind you. So I don't know how many, maybe this opens up opportunity for Eli Ricks to stay. But you wonder, why he, or rather, what role he would have if he were to stay, because he's just not a guy on the outside. That's the biggest thing, is that you need corners. You have plenty of guys who can play in the slot, play in the nickel. You need guys who can play outside. Isaiah Rodgers is going to be playing outside. So Elliott Shore-Parks reported this yesterday. When they're in, given base defense looks and they're not showing nickel, Keon Mitchell is looking like he's going to start on the outside. So he is going to get outside snaps. Keon Mitchell is. So you have an outside corner there. He will switch to the nickel when they do have nickel base packages. But the biggest thing is, you need depth pieces on the outside, like guys that you can throw in there if somebody goes down. And that's what Keely Ringo provides, right? That's why he's useful. Eli Ricks, warts and all, is capable of doing that. And that's why I think that he has a better chance to make this team than Zach McPherson. But I just don't see, and I hate to say it sounds cold, I don't see a reason to keep him around. I think it's better for both parties to let him go pursue other opportunities.
And I completely agree with that, because it's like, again, he's not a bust, right? Like, this kid can ball, but he just hasn't had luck on his side. Like, the year that we expected him to kind of go out, he injured his knee and he was out. And the Eagles did right by the organization by moving on, acquiring depth. They signed Isaiah Rodgers. They draft Quinyon. They draft Cooper. They found Eli Ricks in the undrafted pool. Like, they did the right thing by them. So I wouldn't be surprised of seeing Zach actually getting cut, just because it's more beneficial for him and the organization to move on, like you said. Is there anybody else on your? Go ahead.
I just, if I'm Zach McPherson, I'm making a lot of friends today in Minnesota, just because I legitimately, like, that's one team that, like, has the potential to bring. I understand that they brought in Stephon Gilmore and they, have Byron Murphy Jr., at the top, Shaquille Griffin also, but that depth, that corner depth, is just not. It's not great in Minnesota. So, that's I interestingly enough think that there might be a little bit of scouting between teams today, which there always is, but I think there'll be, a bit of scouting from Minnesota onto, some of these corners, whether it's Eli Ricks or whether it's probably more likely Zach McPherson, because he's a guy that they'd be able to get for free. I think that might be something of interest to watch today.
Or they can look into the ultimate chess piece that we have for them in James Bradbury.
Oh, James Bradbury.
He could play safety and corner and even linebacker if you want.
I heard he's a quarterback too. I heard that somewhere.
King B. Harp has a question for us. How y'all feel about the linebacking core and who starts in the middle? I think we said multiple times that I think we're on the same page with this. Obviously, Devin White guaranteed. I don't think they're starting Zach Bond, but I do believe now that they're starting Nakobe Dean. I'm more on, I say 75% Dean, 25% Bond.
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty confident about Nakobe Dean moving forward. I would say maybe Zach Bond starts week 1, but he's not. I think the leash is very short with Zach Bond. I think he's a guy that Fangio liked initially, but Fangio is he's a brutally honest kind of guy, and just the way that we've heard him speak about this defense, it's clear that Bond hasn't played, up to snuff. Maybe that's because they're playing him an inside linebacker like the Saints did, like many people in New Orleans criticized them for, because he's more of a rushing linebacker. I don't know. That's just me. But I do think that Nakobe Dean has kind of earned that starting spot alongside Devin White. Obviously, Devin White hasn't earned it. That's one thing that a lot of people have been critical of during this preseason. But I think in the regular season, you're going to be looking at like a completely different player out of Devin White. So I'm not overly worried about that. And as far as Jeremiah Trotter Jr., he's earned significant snaps. And if Nakobe Dean does go down, I think Trot could be looking at filling in that role in that scenario.
That would be phenomenal. I think that would be a sight for sore eyes for Eagles fans. The next segment is a segment that belongs to Eric that he created for this or that. So,
wait, do I not get a surprise cut?
I thought you did surprise cut.
No, I didn't list anybody.
My apologies. It's early in the morning still for me.
This is my moment to talk about how Paris Campbell could be a surprise cut for
Whoa!
Yes.
It's early for this nonsense.
It's no. Listen, hear me out.
Oh,
all right,
God.
So if you look at this receiving core, AJ Brown, he's staying. Devontae Smith, he's staying. Jahan Dotson, he's staying. Britton Covey, he's staying. I think they're definitely keeping Johnny Wilson on the roster, right? So that gives you 5 receivers right there. So, are they going to carry 6? Maybe. Are they going to carry 5? I say more likely. Naismith, I think, probably gets to the practice squad. And then after that, I think you're looking at Paris Campbell as a guy who just the injuries, he just can't get it right. The cap implication actually isn't that strong. The dead money is less than $500,000, and the cap savings you're looking at over $700,000. So, like financially, especially considering the cap space that Philadelphia has, it's not that much of a loss. And when they brought him in, again, that was before Dotson was here, right? So when you look at the alternatives they had then, it was like, oh, this is a low risk, medium reward kind of play. He was hurt. It is what it is. Maybe they reunite during the season after he gets some more time to recoup. But, I don't see it out of Paris Campbell right now because he just can't get on the field. And that's a big question mark. I don't think that you can, unless you're going to put him on the PUP. That's the big thing. Like, if you're going to injury stash this guy, that's the only alternative that I see. But I don't see a path to him playing right away. When you look at who's going to be that fourth receiver out there, I don't think that they're going to shy away from putting Britton Covey in offensive snaps. I don't think they're going to go to it, every time. But, with the dearth of talent that they have offensively here, I think they're going to be fine rolling with their big 3. And then, occasionally from there, Johnny Wilson and Britton Covey at the wideout spot.
Tugging at my heartstrings right now because I'm a big Paris Campbell advocate for this team, but I don't disagree with how you just broke everything down. During camp, Campbell felt like he was playing his best football before the injury, but the way the team is structured at the moment, it feels like there's no Howie Roseman wants no room for error. He wants to make sure this team is competing come February. And that's the main goal for every team. But this team in particular, just the amount of talent that they have. I don't put it past them of them playing the game of PUP. Like, put him on there, stash him there, let him get it, let him get his time to recover. And then at least it's what, like 5 to 6 weeks, you got to keep them on there before they're allowed to be active, if I'm mistaken.
I thought it was 4. It might be 5 or 6. I thought it was 4 or 5.
Okay, yeah,
so around that ballpark.
That gives you time to see what you have in the Johnny Wilson. That gives you time to see what you have in Britton Covey, as a receiver. It also allows the guys to get their body in football shape and game shape. They're up to the game speed. So, God forbid an injury happened, a guy like Campbell, who's fresh off IR, could come in and actually just plug and play because he's already acclimated with how the offense is structured. You make a great point as to if they don't do that, then he has no room. It's the fact of the matter. And it kind of sucks in my regard because I feel like, having Dotson and Campbell as your wide receiver 3 and 4, it makes so much more sense because you have guys that have in-game experience. Covey's still coming along. Wilson is a rookie. Smith is not going to be on the starting roster, I don't believe. So, again, if the goal is the Super Bowl, you keep Campbell on this roster. But you got, in my opinion, you got to do it by any means possible.
Okay, well, if the goal is a Super Bowl, you have to do the best moves for the team. And if you have a guy who is going to be effectively a phantom roster spot for the entire season, and I'm not trying to be cruel, it's just a simple fact that he's had an injury-plagued career. He has a groin injury. Those obviously tend to linger, groins, hamstrings, things like that. I will say his leadership is an immense plus for Paris Campbell. The other thing too, and I'm not trying to slander the guy. This is going to come, as if I'm not a
Just us
Paris fan.
turning into the Paris Campbell hate club by
I'm
the
a
leader
Paris
Zach
Campbell fan. I like the
Chavalilla.
guy. I was check my tweets. I was super, or maybe I guess you have to go to the Slack chat. But I was super excited.
no
when
proof
Paris
now.
Campbell. I was excited when he came to Philly. I thought it was half decent. I didn't think he would be a star wide receiver 3, but I like him as an addition. I think he's a solid, potential third guy to have out there. I think that if all goes right, he'd be a great 4th wide receiver. The issue at hand is, mostly availability. But the thing that, I do want to say is that, the whole he was having, his best camp, or he was playing like his best self before the injury. He said that, like, so the only thing about that is, like, you have to take what players say about their own performance with a grain of salt, because, as a player, you're constantly selling yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're selling yourself to the team. You're selling yourself to the fan base. You're selling yourself to your teammates, right? So, with that in mind, like, of course he's going to say something like that. I want to see that on the field, right? So whether or not it's true, it means nothing if we don't have the opportunity to see it. And at this point, we have not had the opportunity to see it. So again, maybe they storm, on any type of injured reserve list. And, I hope that he does make this team as the 4th wide receiver, but you're looking at potentially getting a guy scooped up off your practice squad in Anai Smith or Johnny Wilson. And I think that's a real concern for Philadelphia. So maybe they go ahead and they do keep 6 and they move Smith to the practice squad. And maybe Smith's poor play has dissuaded people from picking him up. Or maybe you just risk it because maybe you've seen enough that, this guy's not really worth protecting. And at that point, you carry 6 and keep Paris Campbell. But for now, it's a question mark for me for sure.
That's broke my heart very, very early in the morning, 9:43 a.m. on a Saturday.
Yeah, how do you
morning.
think I felt when you called out egg rolls, jackass?
Listen, it's a very overrated.
I snitched to Jody Mack on you.
You
about
definitely
that,
did. You definitely snitched. I didn't respond to that on purpose because, Jody, I love you. I don't want to cause any arguments over egg rolls. Chris saying that he hopes Campbell grabs 2 touchdowns now.
Bro, is he playing? Is he?
I have no idea. They haven't put anything out, from my knowledge. I've been kind of keeping my finger on the pulse on Twitter. So waiting to hear back on that. This or that, I feel like we take a little bit of a spin on it. What is the one thing you've learned from the Eagles after this training camp?
There's a couple quick things that come to mind.
Okay.
I mean, the biggest thing, and it's kind of cheap because it has nothing to do with training camp. But this team is absolutely all in, and that's what the Jahan Dotson trade signaled to me. There is no we're looking to improve on last year. It is we are looking to win everything. Like that is immense, and I think that's something that a lot of people may have assumed about the organization. But it's one thing to feel that way, to think that way. It's another thing to see the team, really kind of confirm those beliefs. So, to see them make that kind of a move, to know that there's still the potential for an additional move between now and the trade deadline. Not to mention the fact that after these, like, even if you take this roster minus cuts, right, there's still probably players who are going to be added because you're going to look at cuts across the league and you might find a guy here or there. Heck, maybe there's a pass rusher. Please let there be a pass rusher somewhere out there that Philadelphia can get, who's let go from his team or what have you. But so far, the team has been willing to make the moves to win. And after the Hassan Reddick trade, that was a real question mark in my mind. But after this now Jahan Dotson trade, I feel a lot better about it. But the other thing, I just want to mention this really quick. They have, and I guess what's the best way to phrase this? They have made an effort at linebacker, right? And I think this kind of speaks to my initial point of, kind of being all in. No, they did not go out there and sign the top linebacker in free agency. No, they didn't draft the
Devin Wade was one of the top linebackers in free agency. Come on, put a little respect on his name.
Yeah, but like he has, and I think he's going to be really good in Philadelphia. But he's coming off, a highly controversial season,
Yes.
like a benching postseason performance, which I don't even fully place on him. I think that a lot of that's a coaching mistake as well. But so what my entire point with that is like, and mind you, they signed him to a 1-year deal. Like they didn't lock this guy up for the future or anything like that.
Alshon
Uh,
Jeffrey, baby. Alshon Jeffrey.
yeah, and maybe it is, and I kind of hope that that's the case. But it also works to my point where like they did invest some assets into that spot, right? So they may not have gotten the number one guy, but they got a top 5 guy. They may not have drafted the number one linebacker in the draft, but they got a guy who yes, he's a legacy pick, but he's clearly performing on the field as well. So they are showing that investment in the linebacking position. You bring in Zach Bond, which is at least an attempt, albeit I believe misguided, but it's still an attempt. I think that there is more of a focus on improving the linebacker core, which it's kind of a cross in between. They haven't gone back on their typical process, which they did by signing Saquon Barkley, mind you. So they're showing that flexibility across the field is my point with that. But they haven't gone, a complete 180 with how they've handled linebackers in the past, but they're adjusting a little bit, right? They're coming a little bit closer to that other side. And I think that speaks volumes, and I think that's fantastic for the Philadelphia Eagles.
One thing I could say that, and I want to piggyback off of what you said earlier, is the Eagles are all in, and they're showing that. They're showing a very well way of building a roster. But I want to emphasize as well, like, they're not only all in for this season, it seems like. This team is all in for their Super Bowl window that they have wide open right now. Like, if you look at the deals, Saquon, 3-year deal. Devontae extended. AJ extended. You bring in Devin White for a 1-year deal. Huh?
Chauncey Gardner-Johnson.
3-year deal, right? John Dotson has 2 more years left on his contract. Like, there's reason to that, right? Like, this team is not looking to just win this year. This team is looking to make sure that if they do win this year, they are going to compete again next year. It's all about bringing consistency back to Philadelphia. From the Andy Reid days when they were consistently in the NFC Championship game, I feel like this team is finally doing what we expected them to do after the first Super Bowl win. Like, build around Carson, do what they had to do to win again. They're not being lackadaisical. They're actually adding superior talent to this roster. And I think that speaks volumes with, what their focus is on. They brought in 2 veteran coordinators to make sure that Nick Sirianni doesn't F up again. It's well put together from top to bottom, rookies, veterans, and they're not investing in these old guys anymore, which is, I feel like, very overlooked. Back then, it was signing the is it Martellus is the tight end, so it was Michael Bennett the edge.
Michael Bennett is the defensive player, yeah.
Yeah, so they're not signing a guy like Michael Bennett off free agency and praying a guy that he could turn back the clock. They're signing young guys. Or
Linval Joseph.
And Ndamukong Suh, like this, they're being productive with their signings. Like they're being smart, and it's something we rarely see in sports. It's something we saw the Patriots do for years. It's something we've seen the Chiefs do recently. So to see the Eagles doing this, like the expectation is it's actually starting to feel like the new norm is actually becoming the standard now, and I actually like that for this organization right now.
Yeah, no, I have to agree. And, I think there were certain veteran Band-Aid moves that were solid. You mentioned Ndamukong Suh. I think that particular was the right move. But, there's that you're right in the fact that they're not counting on that anymore, which is the important factor there. They're not relying on those moves, which, while helpful in the short term, are not true solutions. So, they've really come around on that. I need to see more investment in the defensive line in future years, but they did go out and they signed Bryce Huff for a nice solid window that matches along with guys like Jalen Hurts, with guys like Lane Johnson too, because the expectation I think is that he has another 2 to 3 years in him. So I think that's a big key in that window. But I would like to see. And a lot of it depends on the development of the defensive tackles, right? Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. I would like to see them go back a little bit to that building in the trenches, because I'm feeling a little bit light in terms of offensive and defensive line. But I think if you take a gap year to do this and then go back to that building through the trenches, I think that might be the way to build that long-term success. Because again, you talked about a lot of these guys they've locked up for multiple years. Now's your opportunity to take care of the skill positions and everything like that this year. And you've seen the Kansas City Chiefs do this. Last year is a good example too, where the Kansas City will do this, but they'll focus kind of a lot more like offense, defense. So last year was a defensive year for Kansas City, and it helps that they had Patrick Mahomes, obviously. But they built that defense up. It was one of the best defenses in the NFL, and it led them to another championship. And now you go to this year, and they focused on bringing in a lot more offensive players. They drafted Xavier Worthy with their first-round pick. They're looking to build that offense even more. It's kind of not a bad strategy to do that kind of trade-off between building the offense immensely, then building the defense, or a counterpoint being building the skill position players and then focusing back on building through the trenches. Having that kind of flexibility in mindset. That the consistency of building through the trenches served Philadelphia well for so long. But I feel that if you know when to turn those switches on and off, the ability to go back and forth between building through the trenches and then adding skill position players, I think that's the new strategy that could take over the NFL, is that kind of trade-off between focusing on this area than that area in terms of off-season roster construction.
I completely agree with that. And it's funny that we both have the same concern, right? The defensive line, it's usually boom in Philly, but it feels like a little too boom or bust this season.
Damn those Costco people. I can't hear boom without thinking about, a chicken bake.
I feel like they have to make a move for a pass rusher, whether it's off, somebody that got cut or somebody that's bound to get cut and they trade for. In my opinion, I want them to invest in and I know I'm going against what I just said. I want them to invest in a veteran pass rusher for this lineup, because you have a Nolan Smith that could learn from a guy or two. You have Josh Sweat, who needs to stay a little bit more motivated and not fall off like he did last year. You have Bryce Huff, who needs a little bit of development as well. I know Brandon Graham is there, and I'm completely for that. I just feel like Brandon Graham has a bigger responsibility to this defense than having somebody that could be like a subordinate, where it's like, hey, like I need you to develop these guys, and Graham's doing more for the defense. Bringing a guy that's also familiar with Fangio would be a huge plus as well. But I think they do need to invest a draft resource or two in getting this guy.
And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, a draft resource. And the reason why I say that is, one thing that I've said, and Brian, you'll like this because it talks about your Giants. I've wanted to see Philadelphia make a move for the next Brian Burns, right? So the next disgruntled pass rusher out there. And so they missed out on Burns, they missed out on Judon. They're probably going to miss out on Hassan Reddick again, which I think is fine, because I don't know. I have questions about that man. So, if you bring him back in free agency, that's fine, but that doesn't affect this season. So we're talking about this season, right? And you look around the league, and I like Jalen Hunt long term. Zach Bond, if they actually play him in a pass rushing position, I feel decent about that. I don't think he's going to be anything close to a 10-sack guy, but I would like him as a situational pass rusher. Jalix Hunt, I do like long term though. But if you're looking at adding a guy this year, adding a kind of like a fringe star level player, right? A Pro Bowl caliber player, let's say. Where does that player come from on the trade market? You look for a lot of these different teams. How many teams this year do not have the expectation to be competitive? And yeah, some teams are probably fooling themselves. But outside of the Patriots and the Panthers, what team can you look at and say, like, oh, well, they're probably not even going to try to compete this year? So I say that just to say, if you're going to make a move, it's probably going to come closer to the deadline. And at that point, we're talking. Who was that pass rusher that Philadelphia got a couple years ago at the deadline that didn't pan out? The Bears.
Yes. Oh my God. Why is the name escaping me?
Well, anyway, the point is that and I'm sure everyone out there knows who I'm talking about.
Robert.
It was Robert.
Because his real name is Roberto or something that sort. Because he's like half Spanish. Oh my God, he's a good pass rusher too. What the hell? Why is
Robert
he
Quinn.
escaping him? Robert Quinn, that is.
Robert Quinn. Okay. So, the Robert Quinn move, which obviously did not pan out, like that's the kind of situation that you're putting yourself in if you wait till the deadline to make this move. But the deadline's the only time that you're going to really know, like, all right, well, who's really competitive and who's not. You look at a team like Minnesota and you say, all right, well, they're probably not going to be competitive, but in their own mind, they don't think that's the case because they have Justin Jefferson and they have Stephon Gilmore and Harrison Smith, but you still even kind of look at, well, who's going to be available, and not a lot of these teams have that kind of next Brian Burns, potentially, on the trade block or even to be if they don't succeed. So, where does that move come from? That's my big question. Is there a guy that you've thought of that, like, hey, maybe if X player becomes available, this is a guy that Philadelphia should look to add? Because I can't think of that player.
I have, and granted, this player is going to go against everything I mentioned before, but the player also has familiarity with the Fangio scheme and gave recent raves to Vic Fangio on how he coaches. Khalil Mack of the Chargers. It's a big trade, right? It's not gonna be cheap. But we don't know what the Chargers are just yet because new coaching staff. Justin Herbert is coming back from injury. Coming back from a
Completely new wide receiver room and new running back room.
Yes. He is I think he's over the age of 30 already, if I'm not mistaken. But again, like, this is a guy that you bring in and it could just, the only thing it can do to this defensive line group is elevate it. This is not going to be a guy that's going to be bringing it down. This is not going to be a guy that is not here to not win. You get me? Like, this is a guy that he wants to win. He's in the twilight of his career, wants to make things happen. Why not go to a guy, under a coach that you thrived under? And I think come trade deadline, if the Chargers are not in position to where they feel like they're progressing or they're gonna touch the playoffs and succeed, then you make the move for Khalil Mack for whatever it costs at that point. I don't know if the Eagles have any third rounders or fourth rounders. Whatever you got to invest in him. And then, hey, if you have Campbell or Johnny Wilson, like, if you got to throw a receiver or something like that in the mix, I'm not saying that it gets the deal done. I'm just saying you do what you can to elevate this defensive line group because, like Zach mentioned before, it doesn't feel good in my stomach where they are right now. I still get butterflies thinking about if they're going to get a sack or not, kind of thing.
So, great name, first of all. I think that's a player who you will have to wait to see if he's available at the deadline. I think that he very well could be, because this season could become ugly for the Chargers, I feel like. So, if you're talking about a guy who does he fit that profile of a proven player who can be successful in the pass rush for Philadelphia? Yes. Does he match, a team who by the trade deadline, may be a seller? Yeah, I think potentially yes as well. As far as Philadelphia's draft compensation that they have to offer, so next year they have their own first round pick, their own second, whatever's worse between their own third or Miami's third. They have the Lions fourth, and then they have 3 fifth-round picks, their own, the Commanders, and the Texans. So that's a decent amount of compensation. And then you factor in, well, they have the third-round pick, which could become a second-round pick from the Jets in 2026. And that goes with their own first through seventh in 2026. All that comes from Jimmy Kemp's Give Philly Voice. So there's quite a bit of future draft compensation that they do have to offer here. If you want to pair a second, what was, Brian, you would know this, but what was the Giants package for Brian Burns? Was it a second and a fifth round pick? Is that right?
I would notice because I pay attention to things like that happen, not because I pay attention to the guys in North Jersey that wear blue. But yes, it was the second and the fifth, if I'm mistaken. I don't know how they got away with that.
And a conditional fifth, and the Giants got back a fourth round pick.
Yeah.
So I do think that if you're looking at potential second rounder and a fifth rounder, that might get the deal done. Maybe you do 2 fifth round picks, maybe you do 2 5s next year, and the second from 2026. Maybe that's enough. Maybe you do a second and a fifth this year. Honestly, you'll probably have to do even more to get this guy than you did Brian Burns. So maybe you pair this with pair a second this year with the Eagles third in 2026. But whatever the case is, the point is that they do have enough to potentially get this guy. I'm glad that you brought up Khalil Mack because you instilled faith in me that there is somebody out there. It is going to be tough as nails to get him out of LA. But that's the kind of move that I would like to see between now and the deadline.
He has a base salary of 1.5 mil. But the dead cap hit for LA if they trade him now would be 25 mil. Even if they cut him, 25 mil. But next season he doesn't they could void a contract or restructure, whatever case may be. I think you're right. I feel like there's not many standout pass rushers that you expect to kind of be on the block at this point. Like, you think about a guy like Max. Is it Max Crosby in Las Vegas?
Yeah,
a guy like that who's
they love him too much. I don't see that ever happening.
They do love him too much, right? But I feel like he's wasting his career out there, just like Devontae Adams is wasting his career.
I agree.
So I guess to a point where a player kind of says, like, "Hey, like, what the hell? Like, no, like, get me the hell out of here," kind of thing. But there's no. What I'm trying to say, like, there's no players out there that are of that caliber that are going to be available. Which, like, Joey Bosa, Eagles, he would never want to come to Philly after his experience in Philadelphia. But there's not many guys out there, I feel like, that really stand out to be that player you make the move for.
Yeah, I mean, even a team like a sneaky team that could see the wheels fall off in like Tampa Bay. I don't love their defensive tackle depth. I like. I'm not too sure about their pass rush. Like, you're not going to go out and trade for a guy like Vita Vea because you have Jalen Carter and you have Jordan Davis. But Glad Yancey is a rookie and is also truly a defensive tackle. He's just going to be playing like a little bit of edge. Like there's not really a whole lot of players there that you can look for as well. So unless you have a team that, completely falls apart and their future looks like it's not intact, that's kind of the problem too, is that, we're in the age where it's the youngest group of starting quarterbacks. I heard the stat somewhere. I can't remember how long it was. But in an immense amount of time, it's the youngest average age of starting quarterbacks in the NFL. So my point is with that is that you have a lot of teams that, have young potential answers at QB. Everybody's going to fool themselves into thinking that they're competitive, right? So with that being the case, I don't see teams, and Chris mentioned Von Miller, if things go south in Buffalo. I don't know his contract status. If he is a pending free agent, then potentially I could see it. Otherwise, I think Buffalo kind of continues to ride things into next year. Hopefully they build up the receiver core. But that's kind of my point, is that teams, either they have a franchise quarterback or they believe that they may have a franchise quarterback, and it fools them into thinking, well, we don't need to trade off, big pieces because we're going to be fine. Even if it's not this year, it'll be next year.
It's very similar to the situation of the Giants, and they feel like they have a franchise quarterback in Daniel Jones, right? But you traded for Brian Burns, you drafted Kayvon Thibodeau, but looking at the list, right, and this is by salary. Outside linebackers, I wish it was different, not by salary. Contract left. Nope. Salary. So TJ Watt, not going nowhere. Joey Bosa, not going nowhere. Khalil Mack, we mentioned. Montez Sweat was just traded. Harold Landry from Tennessee. Bradley Chubb, Miami, who was actually just recently, not recently, but traded to Miami from Denver. Brian Burns just traded. Matt Milano, who I believe is out for some time, if I'm not mistaken. Josh Allen out of Jacksonville.
If things go bad in Jacksonville, which of course they always could, with Trevor Lawrence at QB and under Doug Peterson, Josh Allen is it Joshua Hines Allen now or something like that?
Yeah, it's Joshua Hines Allen now.
I think there's definitely some potential there. There was one name I was looking at, a potential squad that could kind of fall apart. I'm not overly bullish on the Seattle Seahawks. And, and part of that comes, I don't believe in their quarterback situation, right? And so that's a situation where you have Geno Smith. He had a really good year last year by Geno Smith standards. That's a guy who, I don't know how you can look at that and say we have a franchise quarterback. All deserves praise for his performance last year. That's my gut feeling there. So you're looking at Seattle as a team that I could justifiably say, if things start to fall off, maybe they could move off some guys. So that brings Leonard Williams to my mind. And I know they just signed
Oh,
him to a deal,
yes.
so he's fresh off free agency. But if they feel like they're at the point where, hey, we gotta whether it's recoup some money or whatever we have to do. Leonard Williams is the guy that I'm looking at in Seattle. But again,
Okay.
even still, I can't even imagine how bad that cap situation would be this year for Seattle as an implication of that trade. So, like
Yeah.
this just goes down to my original point. Like, there's just not a lot of great options. I feel like, even look at a team like New Orleans. Like, is Cameron Jordan ever leaving the New Orleans Saints? I don't think so.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of a tough situation, and it's why handling this in the offseason, would have been the preferable way to do it. But of course, Philadelphia had many other additions that they made instead, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just a matter of this wasn't the year to address those needs. So kind of back to what I was
Correct.
saying before, you have to kind of balance this year in, year out. But we handle a lot of the skill positions, a lot of on both offensive and defense this year. Next year, let's focus up on the offensive and defensive lines.
I think that you're absolutely right in that regard. You have a band-aid of a defensive line. We call it like that. I mean, outside of Jalen Carter and hopefully Jordan Davis, it's not too much guarantee of what we're going to see production-wise. Milton Williams, I feel like, could have a breakout season, but he needs to have a breakout season for an extension or for a contract with a new team. But the next year, you did the cornerback stuff, right? Next year, you focus on the defensive line again. You have your offense built for the next 3 years. Your defense is almost there. I think you're right in that regard. There's not a lot of eye candy out there that would say, hey, like, let's throw a second out there and get this guy and make a big splash. Like, outside of Khalil Mack, I feel like, and maybe even Von Miller, you're not really getting much out of this market. But yeah, I mean, we've passed the hour mark. Birds game is today at 1:00. We thank you all for joining us. Any last thoughts from you, Zach, on what to expect today and after today, possibly?
Yeah, I think as for today, just if you're watching the game, which I hope that you are, just have some fun with it. You kind of got to be a true. Oh, Duck made it, and look at that.
Good
Kind of
morning,
have to
Doug.
be a bit of a sicko to love the final season or the final game of preseason. But I'm confident that all of you are just like I am. So, really looking forward to watching this game, to seeing some subpar quarterback play by Kenny Pickett. It's going to be a great day. So take it for what it is. Relax, have fun with it, and then in terms of what's going to come in the hereafter. Just keep a close eye on those cuts, not only from Philadelphia but across the league. Because again,
Mhm.
I expect Philadelphia to be active with some of these players that are cut from other teams.
I completely agree. Yeah, I'm still looking at the list, and there's just not a lot of eye candy for me. But yeah,
There's one name, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but Danico Autry from Tennessee is somebody who potentially could be.
okay.
Um,
So
okay, I'm
sneaky good
looking at.
pickup.
Oh no, he also went to Houston. Damn it!
Oh,
Every
okay.
guy that I'm looking at went to Houston this offseason.
Everybody's buying the
Because
CJ
the
route,
first guy I was
CJ
thinking
Stroud
about is
hype.
like, if only Daniil Hunter was still in Minnesota, like that'd be a guy to
That was
land.
the
What happened to
move.
him? Oh, he was in free agency. He went to Houston. Like every
Yeah,
freaking pass rusher went to Houston.
and I feel like that was the move to if you're gonna make a move this offseason for a pass rusher. Like I, shout out to Fourth and John, Cooper DeJohn Day to all those who that observe.
And
um,
a happy Cooper DeJohn Day to you as well.
Danielle Hunter, like I feel like that was the move to make for a pass rusher. Like I'm hoping that the Bryce Huff hype is more than just what what we're thinking it is. I hope that he can actually develop into this guy that we had in Hassan Reddick. Hassan Reddick wasn't perfect, but he was a damn good pass rusher when we needed him to be. I mean, that first season, causing those fumbles, causing those fourth down and third down stops, it was exactly what we needed. And I think right now the question is who's going to step up to the plate and actually deliver that kind of production. But yeah, we'll be back Tuesday night, guys, 7:30 p.m. Every Tuesdays, every Saturday mornings. We thank you all for joining us, and we hope you guys enjoy the rest of the game. Well, we hope you guys enjoy the game and the rest of your Saturday. I know I will. And Zach, enjoy your trip to Ocean City. Enjoy your vacation, brother. I will
Thank
definitely
you.
bother you as much as I can.
I know you will. I count on it.
But until then, I'm Brian Cameron alongside Zach Chavalella. We're flipping the birds.
Go Birds.
Yes, sir.
Flipping the birds. Flipping the birds. Flipping the birds.